Hello everyone, it's Mr. Vanderpool. Today we're taking a look at the Federal Reserve, which is our nation's central bank, as well as one of the tools of monetary policy that they use, which is multiple deposit expansion. So let's start off by taking a look at the Federal Reserve. So the Federal Reserve is also known as the Fed. There are 12 Federal Reserve district banks, and these collectively serve as the nation's central bank. And the Fed has a variety of responsibilities. It controls the money supply, it supervises member banks, it acts as a lender of last resort. So let me talk about those really quick. Controlling the money supply really is monetary policy, which we're going to get into more both in this instructional video as well as future instructional videos. Supervises member banks, meaning it supervises the Bank of Americas of the world, the Chases of the world, etc. And it acts as a lender of last resort, meaning that if banks need emergency cash, they can go to the Federal Reserve to get that cash. So these banks are centrally governed by the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, which is located in Washington, D.C. And the Federal Open Market Committee, the FOMC, assists the board by conducting open market operations, which is the buying and selling of bonds, which is the primary tool the Federal Reserve uses in monetary policy, which once again, we'll be talking about monetary policy quite a bit over the course of the next unit. So there's Mr. Vanderpool in front of the Board of Governors in Washington, D.C., back in the day when he visited Washington, D.C. And each regional bank, each regional Federal Reserve bank covers a geographical area. So you can see how that's broken down with this map right here. So us being in a Beaumont, we are in region 12. So San Francisco is our local Federal Reserve Bank. And this gentleman right here is Jerome Powell as I speak in 2023. He is the current Federal Reserve chairperson. And one of the things that he'll do from time to time is go before Congress and testify, and this is a picture of that. He'll speak, he'll talk about what the Fed does, about monetary policy, etc. The Federal Reserve is a creation of Congress, and theoretically could get abolished by Congress. That's unlikely to happen, but nevertheless, it is important to realize that the Federal Reserve, being a creation of Congress, is somewhat responsible to them. All right, so now we're going to take a look at a tool of monetary policy. And like I said, we'll talk more about monetary policy later on. But the reserve requirement is a tool that is sometimes used by central banks in monetary policy. So the Federal Reserve requires banks to always have some money readily available to meet consumers' demand for cash. So when you deposit money at a bank, they're going to take that money, they're going to try and make money off that money, but there's a percentage of that money that they have to hold. So when people come in to get their cash, the bank can give them back their cash. And that amount set by the Federal Reserve is the required reserve ratio. It's the percentage of deposits that the banks have to hold. So that way, if people come in asking for cash, they can give it back to them. And the required reserve ratio is the percentage of demand deposits, checking account balances that must not be loaned out. And typically, a typical reserve requirement ratio would be 10%. And a couple of important equations. deals with excess reserves, total reserves, and required reserves. So excess reserves is ER, total reserves is TR, and required reserves is RR. So excess reserves, which is the amount of money that the bank can lend out, is equal to total reserves, the amount that was put in by the deposit, minus the required reserves, which is the amount that the bank has to hold. Now, this is just an algebraic manipulation of total reserves is equal to excess reserves plus required reserves. But generally, the first equation, excess reserves equals total reserves minus required reserves, is the best and most used equation when it comes to calculating excess reserves. All right, the money multiplier. Similar to the spending multiplier, money multiplier shows us how the impact of a change in demand deposits on loans and eventually the money supply. So the money multiplier will show us that if there is a deposit, how much that will change demand deposits, how much that will change loans, and eventually will change the money supply. And to calculate the money multiplier, you divide 1 by the required reserve ratio. So the money multiplier is equal to 1 divided by the reserve ratio. So if the reserve ratio is 25%, then the multiplier is 4. Why is that? 1 divided by 0.25 is going to be 4. 4.